Say someone gets hired at an airline, but in 3 different parallel universes and spends the exact same amount of time at each. In one universe, the airline experiences major shrinkage during the pilot's career. The other experiences stagnation, and the last experiences growth. How do you think this will affect the pilot's career earnings in each parallel universe? Well, the difference is actually astounding, and I'll tell you, it is a figure with 6 zeros. Lastly, have you ever wondered how long it's currently taking pilots at an airline like United to become 777 first officers or 320 or 737 captains? Well, it's probably way less time than you previously thought. I'm talking like low single-digit years. So for you all, I've just spent the last 2 months of my life obsessing over quantifying this data so that you can understand this subject very easily with just a few slides. So buckle up, because I'm about to throw a mountain of information out there for all the data and aviation lovers, and especially for those looking for insight into a career with a legacy airline such as United Airlines. My name's Aaron Mathis, and I'm currently a first officer on the 757 and 767 here at United, or as we like to call it, the 756. I'm also a pilot interviewer and volunteer Aviate Coach, and I'd like to welcome you to the Pilot Pulse channel. Airlines have different crew bases. For example, United Airlines has these select locations as possible pilot bases. Each base can have different fleets that are based in that particular base. For example, Las Vegas only has 737 FO and captain positions, whereas Dulles DCA has fleets to include 320, 73, 756, 777, and 787. Here's an example for each base and category of exactly what percentile today you have to be at a minimum to hold the individual categories. For example, to hold DC 756 FO, someone would have to be in the 90th percentile in the entire company, where holding Houston 756 FO, they would only have to be 95%. And lastly, for DC 777 FO, one would have to be 80% in the entire company. If someone started at United and wanted to climb the ladder as quickly as possible in pay, their career milestones would look something like these numbers, which are based on the previously mentioned airline averages. Someone would start their career at United as a 737 or 320 FO, then move to 756 FO, then 787 FO, then upgrade to 737 captain, then 756 captain, then lastly 777 captain. Now the question is, how long will these moves take in years, depending on the baseline scenarios of shrinking, stagnating, or growing? This graph illustrates progression of company seniority over time, given the different scenarios where red is the 7 years of contraction scenario and someone spends the next 7 years being the absolute lowest person on the seniority list at 100%. You will see where that has a big effect on career earnings in the first 10 years on the next slides. The blue line is where there is no contraction or expansion and the airline remains at the exact same size for a 40-year career. This shows how quickly the average career would grow at United Airlines based on current retirements and the airline only hiring to directly replace the mandatory retirements. Lastly, the green scenario shows what the progression would look like if United Airlines grew from 17,000 pilots to 24,000 pilots between year 1 and year 7 with the company. As you can see, the growth effect causes a pilot to be able to push through the different seniority percentage milestones like 95%, 90%, and 83 and 60% faster, allowing that pilot to transition to higher paying fleets or upgrade to higher paying seats quicker and remain at and above those percentages for longer. For my particular point, I want to focus on the green growth column, since currently it best represents numbers here at United. You can see how a pilot would likely be awarded 737 or 320 FO in new hire training, then transition to the 756 quickly after a little over half a year once reaching 94%, then the 787 FO after another year and a half after reaching 90% seniority. Assuming someone would want to upgrade at first opportunity, once reaching 83%, they could upgrade to the 737 captain after spending about a year and 3 months as the 787 FO. They would just spend under 4 years as a 737 captain until reaching 60% in the company, where they could then transition to the 756 as a captain. After 17 years as a 756 captain, they would be at 22% in the company, where they could then transition to 777 as a captain and spend the last and highest earning years on that fleet until retirement. Having discussed the time to progress from day 0 to the end of a career, it's time to start bringing everything together. In the next several slides I'll show you how quickly In the first three mentioned scenarios, someone could progress in their system seniority, then show how these progressions of seniority affect how soon they can make more money on larger fleets and left seats, and then how all of those numbers culminate into total career earnings between a 5-year career and a 40-year career. Now, big disclaimer. I've calculated all the numbers based on someone starting at United on January 21st of 2027 based on the pay rates on the current UPA 2023 contract to include all mandatory retirements from thenceforward. These numbers also include the 18% direct contribution 401k that is added on top as total earnings, which is also part of the current contract and similar to the other two legacy carriers. Second disclaimer, these numbers are based on minimum guaranteed flight pay, meaning the absolute bare minimum. And someone would actually have to try extremely hard to not make more than the bare minimum in this career. Also, these numbers assume this person never has pay rate increases through negotiated contracts during their career, which is literally nearly impossible. Let's just say it's safe to say that in all of these numbers, these are impossible worst case scenarios, but hey, the Titanic was unsinkable. Anyways, this graph correlates with the previous progression model and shows how the speed of progression allows that person in each scenario to jump to the higher earning pay band quicker and make more money for longer. The largest factor from this graph that affects career earnings is by a pilot achieving 777, 787 captain pay bands several years sooner in their career and remaining there for much longer, and by spending almost half their career in that category and pay band. So how does all this shake out into total pilot career earnings on each scenario? Well, I've calculated out that answer too, and I went ahead and did all the calculations based on previously mentioned scenario timeframes. I've also included all the data in 5-year increments for those that may not have the age to be able to attain a 40-year career. On this table, you can see here the 5-year earnings increments based on how many years someone could work prior to mandatory retirement. This assumes that this person is hired at United and spends the next 7 straight years as the last person on the seniority list, where the airline didn't hire anybody behind them, and the airline contracted at the same rate of mandatory retirements per year, causing stagnation for this person, accounting to 7 years, where the highest earnings in a 40-year career is $13.7 million with $2.4 million in direct 401k contributions, totaling $16.1 million in a total career earnings. Next, the stagnation scenario. On this table, we can see how much money someone would make at United if completing a 40-year career and following a standard rate of progression, where the only time this person moves up in the company is when someone retires from United, and then United hires a person junior to them as a replacement, meaning the company remains stagnant. In this scenario, someone would make $14.5 million in a career in wages, $2.6 million in direct contribution 401k earnings, totaling a career earnings of $17.1 million. This scenario generates an increased career earnings of $1 million over the previous scenario where the airline experienced shrinkage. Next is the growth scenario. This table and scenario assumes what I would like to call the best case scenario, where a pilot is hired at United and then subsequently United hires a surplus of pilots to grow the airline by 7,000 pilots over the course of 7 years following this person's hiring. Because this person experienced faster career progression and thus faster steps up the income ladder, this person will experience greater career earnings in their corresponding career timeframes compared to the other two scenarios of shrinkage and stagnation. In this most optimal career setting, someone could make $15.2 million in career wage earnings, $2.7 million in direct 401k contributions, totaling $17.98 million over a 40-year career, or if you want to look down the ladder, $12.8 million over a 30-year career, or $7.8 million for a 20-year career, and lastly, $3.5 million for a 10-year career. For the purpose of this graph, blue represents the stagnant airline, green represents the growing airline, and red represents the shrinking airline. Comparing all three scenarios side by side is interesting because it shows just how much more the person that starts at the growing airline can make in a career versus the person that starts at a shrinking airline, totaling about $1.8 million difference. Also, For comparison, someone that starts at a stagnant airline will still make about $1 million more in a career than the shrinking airline. To reiterate on the previous graph, in the 3 examples, someone starts on the same day at the same airline of the same exact size in 3 different parallel universes, where one grows, one shrinks, and one stagnates. The person spends the exact same amount of time at all 3 carriers and does the exact same thing at all 3, but one makes $1.8 million more than the other, purely due to the circumstances of the airline they started with. This emphasizes the importance of trying to find an airline that you can get on board with just before a major wave of growth versus going to an airline that is contracting due to the astounding financial gains of airline growth. So what does the landscape at United, for example, look like today? Well, things have actually been better than average here in the last few years. Let's use my personal scenario as an example. I started at United about 3 years ago, and I was hired right about 13,000 in the company, and also the very last on the seniority list for 7 days rather than, fortunately, 7 years. Today, just 3 years later, United has grown to over 17,000 pilots, which is a net gain of over 4,000 pilots in just 3 years. So in my scenario, it looks like I will, fortunately so far, be on the more favorable side on career progressions as far as growth is concerned. The good thing is I personally don't think United is anywhere near finished hiring in record large numbers. Due to very ambitious aircraft orders and future deliveries, I believe United will still exceed a pilot group total of 20,000 in the next year and a half and then continue growing far past that. I know I might get some kickback on this idea, but I've done the numbers, and the math supports that United Airlines will probably find buoyancy in the 24,000 to 26,000 total pilot range as long as previously mentioned plans for the United Next growth plan continue to pan out. Due to this idea, the previously mentioned 7,000 pilots growth over 7 years scenario does look very plausible for someone starting at United in the near future. Lastly, if we were to assume that United does grow to 25,000 pilots, that would mean that someone hired today would see a growth of about 8,000 people behind them, likely in the next 10 years or less. I wanted to take another minute to show everyone what it looks like for time to hold each fleet, seat, and base at United as career progression goes. Since the scenario today matches the predicted scenario for the future, today's current numbers look to remain accurate for the future. Here you can see a table and a supporting graph with time in years to hold each fleet, seat, and base, along with a bar graph to give illustration to the time frames. For example, if someone wanted to know how long it would take to hold DC 320 captain from date of hire, you would look to the connecting boxes to find 1.7 years. Or if you wanted to know how long it would take to hold Chicago 756 as an FO from date of hire, you would go to intersecting sections to find 0.7 years. Any number less than 0.4 years most likely is going to be awarded during initial training. So someone could expect 737 or 320 FO as their most likely award during basic NDOC, then subsequently transition or upgrade once reaching the time on property of another desired category. The lines in yellow are times to hold captain on the 787 and 777, as they are highlighted in yellow because I had to do some estimating with those numbers due to the data that I was referencing being skewed as part of the integration of the United and Continental seniority list in 2013. Any time frames larger than 13 years begin to lose accuracy, but this is more specifically designed to inform those that are considering United in the next few years and what their first few years on property might look like. Lastly, I created a graph depicting the total time to hold all seats at United to illustrate the upper seniority of the 777 and 787 captain seats. Again, I want to reiterate that there's probably only about 70% confidence in the 787 and 777 captain numbers specifically. I just thought this was interesting and thought you might enjoy seeing the difference between the most junior and the most senior categories. This last slide is the same graph without the 777 and 787 captain categories. Therefore, this graph is comprised with about 95% confidence, and it paints a telling story by seeing how relatively junior someone can be to hold the 756 captain category. For example, 756 captain in Newark, San Fran, and LA are all sitting around 2.5 years on property, which is truly fascinating considering prior to COVID, it required being on property for over 10 years at a minimum, and even in the most junior of bases. On the contrary, Dulles DCA remains the most senior base on the 756 captain category, with the most junior pilot on property having almost 9 years with the company, albeit that is still significantly less than pre-COVID. My closing thoughts are that the numbers that I've just shown you exemplify the incredible times that we have industry-wide, and especially here at United. I can personally attest that the growth has been life-changing and will continue likely for the remainder of the decade by creating amazing careers for other pilots pursuant to United for years to come. I hope you all appreciate the data that I've been able to mine for you. It's been a ton of work, but I've really enjoyed all the different talking points that this stuff has actually created. Hopefully you can use these numbers to help you calculate your career earnings with some reasonable accuracy and provide some clarity for those that are questioning if it's all worth it when trying to decide if making the leap into aviation will be fruitful enough to justify the risk. With that, I wanted to mention some interesting statistics regarding the cost of flight training versus the return on investment for different career lengths. For example, if someone divested, say, $100,000, which is the current cost of ATP flight school, into training, and then subsequently was fortunate enough to be able to spend 40 years at a legacy in today's environment, they would see a 180x return on their initial investment. But what if you have, like, say, a shorter career? Here's the numbers. 154x return after 35 years, 128x after 30 years, 102x after 25 years, 78x after 20 years, 57x after 15 years, 35x after 10 years, 15x after 15 years with a legacy airline. Now, this doesn't account for the money made during the experience gaining positions to gain to say 1,500 ATP minimums or the hours spent in a regional or corporate or something similar, but I'm going to refrain from generalizing income pathways prior to a legacy since there's so many different ways to land at a legacy career. I also want to reiterate that those career earnings are nearly impossibly worst case scenarios because it assumes no higher negotiated pay contracts during an entire career, and that assumes someone makes the minimum guarantee flight pay every single month for the entire duration of their career. I personally find that with just a little bit of effort, I can usually make 15 to 20% more than my min guarantee month to month by putting in just a tiny bit of effort. Having a 30-year career and 128xing your investment on a worst case scenario basis sounds like a deal even Kevin O'Leary would be excited about. So if you're teetering on the edge of trying to decide if the career is worth it or not, every day you wait is a diminishing return on your investment, and the best day to start flight training is today and not tomorrow. I do read all the comments, so if you have any interesting ideas for future videos that might create interesting data points, then please drop a comment below. I would also love to know your thoughts about the future of the industry and where you think we might be in like 5, 10, or 20 years. Also, feel free to tell me your thoughts, like, will the airlines continue to grow? Will they shrink, or will they just remain stagnant? Videos like this are a mountain of work, and I'm just a one-man band when it comes to making these things. So I'm doing all the research, all the calculating, Excel spreadsheets, scripting, recording, creating, editing, and publishing. So if you enjoy my content, then please give me a like, give me a subscribe to show your support and desire for more content like this in the future. Thanks so much for watching the Pilot Pulse channel. I'm Aaron Mathis. I hope you all fly safe and keep chasing those tailwinds.